Learn math for section 8.4, we're going to read the lesson. Always, sometimes, never, again. If the statement is not always true, explain why. I'll do my explanations verbally. You can write those explanations. Part A, if a figure has 4 congruent angles, then it is a rectangle. That is true. Always. Always true. Part B, if consecutive angles of a quadrilateral are supplementary, then the quadrilateral is a rectangle. Not necessarily. I'll put sometimes. Because your adjacent angles in a rectangle are 90. 90 and 90 add up to 180, which is what you need for supplementary angles. But you can also have consecutive angles that are supplementary in a shape that isn't a rectangle. Part C. The diagonals of a rectangle are congruent. That is always true. Part D. If both pairs of opposite sides of a quadrilateral are parallel, then the figure is a rectangle. Not necessarily. The best we can do there is say that it's a parallelogram. Now, if you knew something else, maybe you could say it's a rectangle, but we don't know anything else. Part E. Each diagonal of a rhombus bisects a pair of opposite angles. That's always true. F. The diagonals of a rectangle are perpendicular. I'm going to put sometimes for this. The diagonals of a rhombus are always perpendicular. A rectangle is not always a rhombus. There's only one time that a rectangle is a rhombus, and that's when it's a square. Okay? So the diagonals of a square are perpendicular, always. But if you have a square, then it is a rectangle. So the diagonals would be perpendicular in that one case. Part G. Consecutive sides of a square are not congruent. That's never true. Number 2, it's just true or false. Explain your answer in either case. Again, I'll do those explanations verbally. You can write them down. Part A says a rhombus is always a square. That's false. A square is always a rhombus. Part B, a parallelogram is always a rectangle. That's false. A rectangle is always a parallelogram. Think about the family tree. The square is under the rhombus. That's why it's false. The rectangle is under the parallelogram. That's why it's false. Part C, a rectangle is always a square. That's false. Again, other way around. A square is always a rectangle. Part D, a square is always a rectangle. There you go. That's true. Squares always have 4 right angles. A shape with 4 right angles doesn't have to have 4 congruent sides.